Okay, so this is picking up where we left off in the last video. We're going to continue on with some examples, and then we've got some kind of fun problems to go through. So if a figure is a square, then the figure is a parallelogram. If a figure is a rectangle, then the figure is a parallelogram. The question is asking us, what can we conclude from the given information? So remember the first two steps. The first one is, can we make a chain out of the information? So the sentences need to be able to be in the form of if P, then Q, and if Q, then P. So that, or sorry, if Q, then R, pardon me. So we've got three different parts here. But the Q part needs to match up. So the then part of the first sentence needs to be the if part of the next sentence. We have to be able to make that connection or that chain out of it. If we can't make a chain out of it, then we can't make any conclusions. So if a figure is a square, then the figure is a parallelogram. So I am looking for this figure being a parallelogram to be the if part of the next sentence. If a figure is a rectangle, definitely does not match up with the then part here. So our chain is broken. Okay, we don't actually have a chain because the then part of the first sentence and the if part of the next sentence are not the same. Now, we could try to rearrange these sentences. So if I read the second sentence first, that would be acceptable because sometimes you're given information and it's out of order. So let's try that. I'm going to read the second sentence first. So I'm looking for the then part to be the same as the if part in the next sentence. So if a figure is a rectangle, then the figure is a parallelogram. I need this part to be the if part of the next sentence. So the figure is a parallelogram. If a figure is a square, again, those two parts don't match up. So even if I read them out of order, I can't make a chain out of this. I need the then part of one sentence to be the if part of another sentence. So this means I cannot make any conclusion. There's no conclusion. Because I cannot make a chain out of it. Okay? So it's very much different from this one where the then part of the first sentence, then it is divisible by 6 if it is divisible by 6. This one made a chain, right? Because that middle portion was the same. We were able to make a chain out of it. We were able to connect the two statements. Okay. Problem number 3. What can we conclude from the given information? This time, the information is all going to connect together, okay? And then we're given some information about a person. Okay, so we need to make a conclusion about this person. So our conclusion has to have something to do with Ken. So the statements are, if you live in Cincinnati, then you live in Ohio. So now, in order to make a conclusion, the if part of the next sentence has to be something about us living in Ohio. If you live in Ohio, so there's our chain. This is the connection. If we live in Ohio, then you live in the United States. Now, what they give us here is the very first if. Remember from up here, if we can make the chain, which we can make the chain out of this information. We have to be given the first if, or we have to state the first if and then the last then. Okay? So, what we know about Ken is that he lives in Cincinnati. He satisfies the first if. We follow it all the way to the end. The last then he must live in the United States. This is our conclusion. But we have to say it about Ken. We have to be very specific because they're specific in what they're telling us here. Ken lives in Cincinnati. The conclusion is that Ken lives in the U.S. Okay? Now let's try this one. Write the final true conditional based on the logic chain. If Rick takes chemistry this year, then Jesse will be Rick's lab partner. If Jesse is Rick's lab partner, then Rick will get an A in chemistry. So the question is, number 1, can we make the chain out of it? And the second part is we have to start with the first if and the last then. Okay, so we need to write a sentence. If we're given the first if, then we can ignore it, writing it down, which kind of like this one here, right? So we were able to make the chain, then they were giving us something here from the first if. Okay, so the first if, Ken lives in Cincinnati, then we have to state something about the last then he lives in the United States. Compare that to this one. Here they're not telling us anything about Rick actually taking chemistry this year. So I'm going to have to state both the first if and the last then in my conclusion. Okay, so first, can we make a chain out of it? If Rick takes chemistry this year, then Jesse will be Rick's lab partner. So Jesse being Rick's lab partner needs to be the same in the next if, which it is. So we can make the chain out of this information. Now, to write the conclusion, we have to state the first if and the last then, because they didn't give us any information about what Rick is actually doing, like they did up here. They said Ken lives in Cincinnati. They don't tell us if Rick is actually taking chemistry. So we don't know this part, so we have to state it down here. Okay, so now we state the first if Rick takes chemistry, then Rick will get an A. In chemistry. Okay, so that is how you do that. Of course, your conclusion needs an if part and a then part. So to summarize, because they didn't tell us anything specifically about Rick actually taking chemistry, like this one here told us Ken is actually living in Cincinnati. This one has a satisfied if part, so we know something about Ken living in the United States. This one here, they didn't give us anything about Rick, so we have to state both the if and the then. Okay, everybody, now we are going to be working on this Prove It activity. So if you would find this, please, in your notes packet. It is, I believe, on the very next page. So we are going to be using both rules and facts. So rules are like our properties in geometry. And the facts are like our given information. Okay, so today we are actually going to be structuring the information in this particular scenario. It's like a murder mystery, in order to prove that someone is guilty. And we're structuring it just like we would a geometry proof. So my hope for today is that you get a basic understanding of the general structure of a geometry proof. Okay, we've got two things we work with. We have given information and we have properties or rules. Okay, so first we are going to organize our given information. We're going to figure out what the problem is actually telling us. What do we know? Okay, so I'm going to read through this scenario. Then I'm going to outline my information down here. Before I even look at the rules, I'm gonna outline the information about all of the characters down here, just so I have a better idea of what's going on. So it says Professor Plum has been found murdered in the library with the candlestick. Okay, so we know Professor Plum is deceased. We are looking to figure out who murdered Professor Plum. Now it says Mrs. White and Mrs. Scarlet never liked Professor Plum. So we've got Mrs. White and Mrs. Scarlet. They disliked him. So I'm making a note of that. They disliked Professor Plum. Colonel Mustard is missing a candlestick. So I am organizing my information. I would like for you to do the same. Colonel Mustard, he's missing the candlestick. Okay. Mrs. Scarlet and Colonel Mustard do not have alibis for the night in question. So Mrs. Scarlet has no alibi. and neither does Colonel Mustard. Okay. Mrs. White has an alibi that is confirmed. So Mrs. White has an alibi. And it's confirmed. Mrs. Scarlett's, Professor Plum's, and Mrs. White's fingerprints were all found at the crime scene. So Miss Scarlett's fingerprints were found. Professor Plum, well, of course, his fingerprints are going to be on the scene, right? He's the deceased. And then Mrs. White's fingerprints. Okay, so now our job is to prove who did it. Okay, so this is all of the given information. This is what we know about each of our characters here. Now let's go through the rules. The rules are really what's going to help us to prove who's done this. Okay, because this is what law enforcement is going to do given this information. So, rule number 1, it says if the person disliked Professor Plum, then they are a suspect. So anybody who disliked him is a suspect. So now we've got Miss White and Miss Scarlett. They are suspects. Okay, by rule number 1. Rule number 2 says if the person is missing a candlestick, then they are a suspect, because obviously that was the murder weapon. Colonel Mustard, he's missing the candlestick, so he is also a suspect. So all 3 people are suspects at this point. If the person is a suspect, then they will be interrogated. So all 3 people are interrogated. If the person is interrogated and they have an alibi, then they are cleared. So the person is no longer a suspect. So Mrs. White, she had an alibi. She has been cleared. So right now, I am just going through the information to make a hypothesis who did this. Okay, then we have to structure our proof of it. Okay, so we've gone through rule number 4. If they have an alibi, then they are cleared. If the person is interrogated and they don't have an alibi, then their fingerprints and DNA are taken. So now we're down to Miss Scarlett and Colonel Mustard. They don't have alibis, so they're fingerprinted, both of them. If the person's DNA or fingerprints match those found on the crime scene, then they are charged with murder. So who's charged with murder? Just Miss Scarlett, because her fingerprints were found on the scene. Okay, and that's what that very last statement is saying. Colonel Mustard's fingerprints were not found on the scene. So Colonel Mustard is ruled out. It was Miss Scarlett. And that's what we're running with. Okay, now the next video is going to show you how to structure the proof. Because obviously in court, the prosecutor has to show the jury exactly what happened, and they have to lay out the information nicely so that the jury can follow, right? They have to know what the investigators found. They have to know the law, and if the person was interrogated and their fingerprints were found at the scene, then they have to know all these laws, right? All these rules. They have to understand the rules and the given information and how it all fits together. So that's what we're going to do next. We've made our conjecture or our educated guess about who did it. We are going to say Miss Scarlett did it, but now we have to do the prove it part. We have to actually prove who murdered Professor Plum. Okay, we're going to do it in the proof table. So I need you now to start the next video, and we will be working on proving that Miss Scarlett murdered Professor Plum.